The rain started just after midnight. Not the gentle kind that helps people sleep. This was cold, heavy rain that slammed against windows and flooded the empty streets of Chicago. Most people stayed inside that night, wrapped in blankets, scrolling through their phones, unaware that somewhere downtown, under a flickering bus stop light, a 12-year-old boy sat alone with a soaked backpack pressed against his chest. He had nowhere to go. Cars rushed past him. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked twice. Until one woman did. And that single moment of kindness would change not only the boy's life forever, but hers too. Before we begin this emotional story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can completely change someone's world. Now let's begin. Marcus Hill had spent most of his life believing that people only cared about themselves. At 12 years old, he already understood things many adults never learned. He knew what hunger felt like when your stomach twisted so hard you couldn't sleep. He knew how embarrassing it was to wear the same hoodie every day at school. He knew how quickly people judged someone before hearing their story. Most of all, he knew what abandonment felt like. His mother had struggled with addiction for years. Some days she was loving and warm, singing old songs while making grilled cheese sandwiches in their tiny apartment. Other days she disappeared for hours, sometimes days. Marcus stopped asking questions long ago. That Wednesday afternoon, he came home from school and found the apartment door unlocked. Inside, drawers were open. Clothes were missing. The kitchen table was empty except for a note written in shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry, baby. I can't do this anymore." That was it. No address. No explanation. Nothing. At first Marcus thought she'd come back. He waited all afternoon. Then evening came. Then night. Still nothing. The landlord knocked around 10 p.m. and demanded rent his mother hadn't paid in months. When Marcus explained he was alone, the man sighed heavily and told him he had until morning before the locks changed. Marcus packed everything he could fit into his old backpack. 2 shirts. A math notebook. A family photo from years ago when things were better. Then he walked out into the storm with nowhere to go. By midnight, he was sitting at the bus stop trying not to cry. That's when Evelyn Carter saw him. Evelyn was 43 years old and exhausted. She worked long shifts as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. Normally she took the highway home, but flooding forced traffic into side streets that night. She almost missed the bus stop completely. Almost. Something about the boy caught her attention immediately. Maybe it was the way he hugged the backpack like it contained his entire life. Maybe it was because he reminded her of someone she used to know. Or maybe it was simply because kindness often begins with noticing what everyone else ignores. Evelyn drove past him at first. Then she looked in the rearview mirror. The boy hadn't moved. Rain poured through the broken side panel of the bus shelter, soaking his shoes and jeans. Cars sprayed water beside him. He looked freezing. Evelyn's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A voice in her head warned her not to stop. The city wasn't always safe. People told stories about scams and danger all the time. But another voice whispered something louder. What if that were your child? Before she could change her mind, Evelyn pulled over. Marcus heard the car door slam and immediately became alert. He stood up, ready to run if necessary. The woman approaching him wore blue hospital scrubs under a long coat. She held an umbrella over both of them. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay out here?" Marcus nodded automatically. It was the kind of lie people expected. Evelyn looked at him carefully. "You waiting for someone?" "No." "You live nearby?" Marcus hesitated. He didn't know whether telling the truth was dangerous or safe. Finally he shrugged. "Not really." Evelyn's heart sank. Years working in emergency rooms had taught her how to read pain in people's faces. This boy wasn't just lost. He was alone. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Marcus." "I'm Evelyn." He said nothing. Rain pounded around them. "You eaten tonight?" she asked. Marcus looked away. That answer told her everything. "Come on," Evelyn said. "There's a diner still open down the street. Let me buy you something warm." Marcus immediately shook his head. "I don't have money." "You don't need any. I'm fine." "No," she said quietly. "You're not." For a second Marcus thought about running. Every lesson survival had taught him screamed not to trust strangers. But another part of him, the tired, hungry, lonely part, wanted desperately to believe someone could still be good. Finally he nodded once. They walked through the rain together. The diner smelled like coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. Warmth wrapped around Marcus so suddenly he nearly cried from relief. Evelyn ordered him pancakes, eggs, hot chocolate, and fries. Marcus stared at the table when the food arrived. "You can eat," Evelyn said with a small smile. He tried to eat slowly at first. Then hunger took over. Evelyn pretended not to notice how quickly the food disappeared. After a while she asked, "So where are your parents?" Marcus froze. The fork stopped in his hand. Evelyn immediately regretted asking so directly. But then Marcus surprised her. He told her everything. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just quietly, like someone describing weather. His mother leaving. The eviction. The note. The bus stop. Evelyn listened without interrupting once. By the end, Marcus stared down at the empty hot chocolate cup, embarrassed. "I know I should have called somebody," he muttered. "You're 12, Evelyn said softly. "None of this is your fault." Nobody had said words like that to him before. Not teachers. Not neighbors. Not adults. Marcus suddenly felt something dangerous rising in his chest. Hope. Evelyn stepped outside the diner and made several phone calls. Child Protective Services. A social worker. Emergency youth housing. But the storm had created citywide problems. Shelters were overloaded. Staff shortages delayed everything. The soonest anyone could properly place Marcus would be the following afternoon. Evelyn looked through the diner window at the exhausted boy trying not to fall asleep in the booth. Then she made a decision that would change both their lives. "You can stay at my place tonight," she told him. Marcus blinked. Why? The question broke her heart. Because children shouldn't have to wonder why someone helps them. Evelyn smiled gently. Because sometimes people need help. Her apartment was small but warm. Marcus stood awkwardly near the doorway while Evelyn found him dry clothes belonging to her nephew. She made up the couch with blankets and gave him a towel. "You're safe here," she said before heading to her bedroom. Marcus barely slept. Years of instability had trained him to expect kindness to disappear quickly. He kept waiting for yelling, anger, or conditions attached to the help. But morning came quietly. Evelyn made pancakes before work. Real pancakes. Not frozen. Marcus watched her move around the kitchen like this was normal. "Why are you being nice to me?" he finally asked. Evelyn paused. Then she answered honestly. "When I was your age," she said quietly, "someone was nice to me when they didn't have to be." Marcus listened carefully. "My mom died when I was 11, Evelyn explained. "My dad worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep things together. One of my teachers noticed I stopped eating lunch at school because we couldn't afford it." She smiled faintly at the memory. Every day after class, she'd pretend she had extra food she didn't want to waste. Sandwiches. Fruit. Cookies. She saved me more times than she ever knew. Marcus looked down. One person can change everything, Evelyn said. Those words stayed with him. The social worker arrived later that afternoon. Her name was Denise. She was kind but clearly overwhelmed, carrying folders stacked under her arm and speaking with the exhaustion of someone trying to save too many people at once. Marcus expected to be taken immediately to a shelter. Instead, Denise sat at Evelyn's kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. She asked Marcus questions about school, family, medical history, relatives. Then she pulled Evelyn aside privately. Marcus couldn't hear everything, but he caught certain phrases. Temporary placement. Emergency foster. Background check. When Denise left, Evelyn sat silently for a long moment. Finally she looked at Marcus. "Well," she said carefully, "it looks like you might be stuck with me for a little while." Marcus stared at her. "You mean, here?" "Only temporarily," Evelyn clarified. "Until they figure things out." He nodded quickly, pretending not to care. But that night, when Evelyn showed him the small spare room she'd cleaned out, Marcus sat on the bed after she left and cried silently into the pillow. Not because he was sad. Because for the first time in years, he felt safe. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Marcus slowly learned that Evelyn's kindness wasn't temporary performance. It was simply who she was. She helped neighbors carry groceries without being asked. She worked overtime shifts to cover for sick co-workers. She remembered birthdays nobody else remembered. And somehow, little by little, Marcus started changing too. At school, teachers noticed the difference almost immediately. His grades improved. He smiled more. He stopped getting into fights. One afternoon his math teacher pulled him aside after class. "What happened to you?" she asked jokingly. "You're like a completely different kid." Marcus thought about it carefully. Then he answered, "Somebody cared." Meanwhile, Evelyn faced challenges nobody saw. Being a foster parent wasn't easy. The paperwork alone was endless. Money became tighter. Sleep became rarer. And emotionally, she struggled with fear. Because the more Marcus became part of her life, the more terrified she became of losing him. She never told him that. Instead she helped with homework, attended school meetings, and listened when nightmares woke him in the middle of the night. One evening about 6 months later, Marcus asked a question that caught her completely off guard. "Why didn't you have kids?" Evelyn nearly dropped the dish she was washing. She turned off the sink slowly. "Life just worked out differently," she said. That wasn't the full truth. The truth was more painful. Years earlier, Evelyn had been pregnant once. A baby girl. But complications during delivery took the child before she ever came home from the hospital. The loss destroyed Evelyn's marriage. Her husband eventually left, unable to cope with grief that haunted every room of their house. After that, Evelyn buried herself in work. Helping others became easier than facing her own pain. Until one rainy night at a bus stop changed everything. Marcus noticed the sadness in her face immediately. "You don't gotta tell me," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled weakly. "Thank you." But later that night, she sat outside Marcus's room listening to him sleep and realized something important. Kindness had rescued her too. Not just Marcus. Her. Because loving someone again had brought life back into parts of her heart she thought were permanently broken. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered Chicago streets in thick white silence. Christmas lights appeared in apartment windows across the city. Marcus dreaded the holidays. They reminded him too much of instability. Broken promises. Empty apartments. But Evelyn was determined to change that. She bought a small tree from a corner lot and made Marcus help decorate it. He pretended not to enjoy it. But Evelyn caught him smiling when he thought nobody was looking. On Christmas morning, Marcus woke before sunrise. For a moment he panicked, confused by unfamiliar peace and warmth. Then he smelled cinnamon rolls baking. He walked slowly into the living room. Presents sat beneath the tree. Not many. But enough. Evelyn handed him a small wrapped box first. Inside was a framed photo. The two of them at the diner where they first met. Marcus stared at it silently. I asked the waitress to take it that night, Evelyn explained softly. I figured maybe one day we'd want to remember where everything started. Marcus looked like he might cry again. Instead he whispered, "Nobody's ever bought me Christmas presents before." Evelyn had to turn away briefly to hide tears. Later that afternoon, Marcus gave her his gift. It was handmade. Crooked cardboard wrapped carefully in newspaper. Inside was a bracelet woven from blue string. I made it at school, he muttered awkwardly. Evelyn held it like it was priceless jewelry. It's perfect. And she meant it. Years passed. Kindness continued doing what kindness does best. It spread. Marcus entered high school carrying lessons Evelyn never formally taught him. Lessons absorbed through observation. Hold doors open. Listen when people speak. Notice who sits alone. Help without expecting reward. At 15, Marcus started volunteering weekends at a community food pantry. At 16, he tutored younger kids struggling in math. At 17, he used money from a part-time grocery store job to secretly buy winter coats for homeless students at school. When Evelyn discovered what he'd done, she asked why he spent nearly every paycheck helping strangers. Marcus looked surprised by the question. Because somebody did it for me. By his senior year, Marcus had become known throughout school for helping others. Teachers trusted him. Students respected him. One guidance counselor even called him the kindest kid in the building. Marcus didn't think of himself that way. To him, kindness wasn't extraordinary. It was survival. During graduation season, Marcus received news neither he nor Evelyn expected. He earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University. When the acceptance letter arrived, Evelyn screamed so loudly neighbors knocked on the wall. Marcus laughed harder than she'd ever heard. Then suddenly both of them were crying. That night they sat together eating cheap takeout Chinese food at the kitchen table where so many important conversations had happened. You know, Evelyn said softly, I'm really proud of you. Marcus shook his head. You saved me. No, Evelyn replied immediately. You saved yourself. I just gave you somewhere safe to stand. But Marcus knew better. Without kindness, he would have disappeared into the cracks of the world like so many forgotten kids. And he never forgot that. College changed Marcus's life again. At Northwestern, he studied psychology and social work. He became fascinated by how trauma affected children and how compassion could interrupt cycles of pain. Professors noticed his unusual empathy immediately. One mentor, Dr. Alan Green, once asked Marcus why he seemed so personally invested in helping vulnerable kids. Marcus answered simply. Because I used to be one. During his second year of college, Marcus received devastating news. His biological mother had died from an overdose. The phone call shattered him in ways he didn't expect. No matter how much abandonment hurt, part of him had always secretly hoped she'd return someday healthy and apologetic. Now that possibility was gone forever. Marcus locked himself in his dorm room for nearly 2 days. Evelyn drove to campus immediately after his roommate called her. When Marcus finally opened the door, he looked 12 years old again. Lost. Exhausted. Fragile. I don't know why this hurts so much, he whispered. Evelyn pulled him into a hug. Because she was your mother, she said softly. And you loved her. Marcus cried harder than he had in years. Evelyn stayed the entire weekend. Sometimes kindness means fixing problems. Other times it simply means sitting beside someone while they hurt. After college, Marcus made a decision that surprised nobody who knew him. He became a social worker specializing in homeless youth. The job was emotionally brutal. Long hours. Terrible stories. Children carrying pain too heavy for their age. But Marcus understood them in ways textbooks never could. One snowy evening, nearly 15 years after the night Evelyn found him, Marcus was leaving a youth shelter downtown when he saw a teenage girl sitting alone outside a convenience store. She couldn't have been older than 14. Thin jacket. Broken backpack strap. Terrified eyes pretending not to be afraid. Most people walked past without noticing. Marcus stopped immediately. And suddenly he understood something powerful. This was how kindness traveled through the world. Person to person. Heart to heart. Like invisible light passed forward through generations of pain. Marcus approached carefully. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" The girl shrugged. He recognized the lie instantly. "What's your name?" "Kayla." "I'm Marcus." Snow fell softly around them. "You eaten tonight?" he asked. Kayla shook her head. Marcus smiled slightly. "Come on," he said. "Let's get something warm." Years earlier, another person had said almost the exact same words to him. And because she had, Marcus now stood in the position to save someone else. That's how kindness works. Not always dramatically. Not loudly. But powerfully. Like ripples spreading across water long after the first stone disappears. Meanwhile, Evelyn grew older. Gray slowly replaced dark hair. Reading glasses appeared beside her favorite chair. Long hospital shifts became harder on tired knees. But her spirit never changed. One spring afternoon, Marcus visited her apartment carrying exciting news. He had been selected to lead a new nonprofit program for homeless youth across Chicago. The organization planned to open emergency housing centers, counseling programs, and educational support systems. Evelyn nearly burst with pride listening to him explain everything. Then Marcus handed her a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside were architectural drawings. Blueprints. Large bold letters across the top read: "The Evelyn Carter Youth Center." Evelyn stared silently. Marcus smiled. "You gave me a home when nobody else would," he said. "Now we're building one for hundreds of kids." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes instantly. "You didn't have to name it after me." "Yes," Marcus said softly. "I did." Construction began later that year. The project gained attention across the city. Donations poured in after local news stations shared Marcus and Evelyn's story. People connected deeply to the idea that one simple act of compassion could create something so much bigger. At the grand opening ceremony, reporters gathered while city officials gave speeches. But the moment everyone remembered happened near the end. Marcus stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd. Then he found Evelyn sitting in the front row. "When I was 12 years old," he began, "I sat alone at a bus stop during a storm believing nobody cared whether I lived or died." The room became completely silent. One person stopped. Marcus looked directly at Evelyn. "She didn't save me because she was rich. She didn't save me because she had extra time. She saved me because she chose kindness in a moment when it would have been easier to keep driving." Several people wiped tears away. Marcus continued. "We talk about changing the world like it requires huge power or fame. But sometimes changing the world starts with buying a hungry kid dinner. Sometimes it starts with noticing someone everybody else ignores." His voice cracked slightly. "I am alive because somebody cared." The audience stood in applause before he even finished speaking. Evelyn cried openly. Not from pride, but from overwhelming realization. She almost hadn't stopped that night. One small decision had created an entirely different future for both of them. Years later, the Evelyn Carter Youth Center became one of Chicago's most respected youth outreach programs. Thousands of kids passed through its doors. Some needed food. Some needed shelter. Some simply needed someone to believe they mattered. Marcus made sure every staff member understood the center's philosophy. Kindness first. Always. Not pity. Not judgment. Kindness. Because people heal differently when they feel seen instead of condemned. One evening, after finishing paperwork late, Marcus walked through the quiet halls of the center. Photos lined the walls. Kids graduating. Families reunited. Volunteers smiling. Lives rebuilding. Near the entrance hung a framed picture of a rainy bus stop. Below it was a small plaque with words Marcus wrote himself. One act of kindness can become 1,000. He stopped there for a long moment. Thinking. Remembering. Then his phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. "Don't forget dinner Sunday," she said immediately when he answered. "And don't show up late this time." Marcus laughed. "Yes, ma'am." "And Marcus?" "Yeah. I'm proud of you." He smiled softly. "Everything good in my life started with you." After hanging up, Marcus stood quietly in the hallway while distant laughter echoed from the shelter recreation room. Kids playing. Safe. Warm. Alive. And he realized something beautiful. Kindness doesn't always erase pain. Marcus still carried scars from childhood. Evelyn still carried grief from losing her daughter. But kindness gives people strength to survive pain without becoming cruel themselves. That may be its greatest power of all. The world often teaches people to protect themselves by hardening their hearts. To become suspicious. Detached. Self-focused. But kindness refuses to let suffering have the final word. It says, "I see you. You matter. You are not alone." And sometimes those simple messages rescue people standing silently at the edge of hopelessness. Not long after Evelyn retired from nursing, Marcus took her back to the diner where they first met. The old place barely changed over the years. Same cracked booths. Same smell of coffee. Same neon sign buzzing in the window. They sat together near the back while snow drifted softly outside. "You know," Evelyn said, smiling over her coffee cup, "I almost kept driving that night." Marcus stared at her. "What?" "I was tired," she admitted. "And honestly, scared." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Well, I'm glad you didn't." "So am I." The waitress brought pancakes. Marcus laughed immediately. "Seriously?" Evelyn grinned. "Some traditions matter." For a while they simply sat in comfortable silence. Then Marcus asked quietly, "Do you ever think about how different life could have been?" "All the time," Evelyn answered. Marcus looked out the window thoughtfully. "I used to think kindness was something small," he said. "Like manners or helping old people cross streets." Evelyn smiled. "And now?" "Now I think kindness is the reason people survive." Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Outside, strangers hurried through snow-covered streets, each carrying invisible battles nobody else could fully see. Some were lonely. Some grieving. Some exhausted. Some hanging on by threads thinner than anyone realized. And somewhere among them, opportunities for kindness waited quietly. A smile. A conversation. A warm meal. A second chance. Tiny moments capable of changing entire lives. Just like one rainy night years earlier. As they prepared to leave the diner, Marcus noticed a teenage boy sitting alone near the front window. Thin jacket. Nervous eyes. Backpack clutched tightly against his chest. Marcus and Evelyn exchanged a glance immediately. The same glance. The kind shared between people who understand something deeply without words. Marcus stood. "Where are you going?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew. He smiled softly. "To check on somebody." And that's where our story truly ends. Not with perfection. Not with a miracle that erased every hardship. But with kindness continuing forward. Because real kindness never stops with one person. It moves. It spreads. It survives. The smallest act of compassion can become the beginning of someone else's entire future. So tonight, tomorrow, or maybe even a few minutes from now, you may find yourself standing at your own version of that rainy bus stop moment. You may see someone hurting. Someone struggling quietly. Someone everybody else ignores. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. Keep driving. Or stop. You may never fully understand what your kindness means to another person. But trust this. One kind moment can echo through generations. One caring decision can rewrite a life. And sometimes, the person you save may someday save countless others too. So hold doors open. Check on your friends. Feed someone hungry. Speak gently. Forgive when you can. Love loudly. Because kindness is never wasted. In a world where people often feel forgotten, your compassion might become the very thing that helps someone keep going. And that matters more than you know.